See what's going on. We'll be back in a moment, or we'll begin in a moment. Give me a minute to just figure out why we are only on YouTube, not on Facebook. Okay, just a moment, ladies and gents. As soon as we are on both YouTube and Facebook, then we shall begin. And do we have any experts here? Any fundis? What do they call them? Who knows this expertise? Who's got the expertise to know why we're only on YouTube? And hello, all you YouTubers who are watching us, but we've been getting requests for Facebook as well. So just give it a minute. Let's see what's going on. As soon as we figure out, okay, I'm not going to make everyone wait a whole day. So to the Facebookers, I'm going to apologize if we're not on there in a minute. Let's just check one more moment why we're only on YouTube right now and not on Facebook. Okay, I have no answer to that. I'm not going to make everyone wait. So we will begin today's shiur discussion. It's actually going to be a continuation in a sense of our previous discussions, because we started talking about Lag BaOmer, but today I want to get a little bit more practical, and then we could go back to the history of one of the great sages who we commemorate on this day, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Because after all, Rabbi Shimon is the person who we are, well, one of the people we're celebrating and commemorating on this day. So we're going to just get our live, let the screen go up there. Okay, here we are, and put the slideshow we put together on. Okay, can you all see? Great. Okay, so we'll go back into a little bit of the history of Lag BaOmer, its significance, and then we'll try to spend a little bit more time talking about the great sage Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and learn a little bit about the history of this great sage. So yesterday we talked a little bit about Lag BaOmer, and we asked, what is it that makes this day such a significant and celebratory day, right? We're celebrating. We, in fact, and I invite all of you to join us if you want to come this evening to a brai at the Santon Central Shul. You're all welcome to join us for a wonderful brai. We would love to have you join us and a bonfire. It's all going to be outdoors with social distancing. We'll have music, stories, and we'll sing songs and have delicious food. Let me tell you, the chicken has been marinating since yesterday, just to let you know what's going on. Anyways, what is it that's so special about this day? And let's go a little bit into the history, because we're coming from Pesach. We're counting on to Shavuos. And Pesach, of course, we all enjoyed the good family time together and the wonderful cuisine and all the other aspects of the traditions that we celebrate in Pesach. But starting from Pesach, we began a countdown of 49 days towards Shavuos, right? We had our liberation from our bondage, our slavery in Egypt, and we're working towards receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai. Of course, there's another aspect. The Torah tells us, you should count for yourselves from the morrow of Shabbos, from the day that you brought the Omer offering that was done in the times of the temple, and of course before that in the times of the Mishkan. And the Torah says, Sheva Shabbos Tamim, you should count 7 complete weeks until we reach the 50th day. So for the Jewish people, when they left Egypt, this was a countdown to receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai. It wasn't just an event that's going to happen. When you're looking forward to an exciting event, counting down to my son's bar mitzvah. So there's a certain anticipation and excitement. You're counting down to a family simcha, to a wedding. There's an excitement. There's a countdown. For the Jewish people, they left Egypt, but they knew the point wasn't just freedom from bondage, from slavery, but rather there was a purpose for the freedom, that they're going to receive the Torah at Mount Sinai. That was the purpose of the freedom. And so this is a countdown, an excitement, an anticipation for the great day that was coming. So we count 49 days because our sages, we understand that Shavuos is the 50th day. And for me as a child, I never forgot these numbers. A little secret, I'm born on Shavuos, right? So, and by the way, one of my best birthday presents, I have a son who was born on my birthday. And my mother always told me, firstly, strangely, I weighed 6.13 pounds. Don't tell me, I don't know what that is in kilos. 6.13. That's a nice weight for a Shavuos birthday. Funnily, my son was born 6'12". So that's quite interesting that he was an ounce less than me. The other thing is, so I was born on Shavuos, weighing 6'13", and then I was brought to 448. That was our home address in Brooklyn. So, the numbers were always in my mind. But we count the days. And last night we counted 32. So that means tomorrow is going to be the 33rd day of the Omer. And it's a tremendous celebration. But what are we celebrating? We're just celebrating a random number. People wonder what's Lag BaOmer, or something say Lach BaOmer, because the G in this country is pronounced as Ch. But it's not Lach BaOmer, it's Lag. What is Lag? Lag is the two letters coming together. Lamed and Gimel. Lamed is 30, Gimel is 3. So you have the 33rd day. It's always on the 18th day in the month of Iyar, which is an interesting discussion of its own, which I previously talked about. Won't go too deep into today. But the Talmud talks about the astrological signs related to each time of the year. And it's not only in the newspapers where you see the daily horoscope, but rather we in Judaism believe in this. We have these aspects as well in our lives. So the month of Nisan, when the Jews left Egypt, that was the astrological sign of Aries. What's Aries? The ram, sheep, herd animals. And indeed, when we leave Egypt, we had to come together. We were all united as one. There was a certain herd aspect. If you want to recuperate from a coronavirus, there's an aspect, an idea of herd mentality, of herd immunity, right? So that is the beginning of the Omer counting. The first 2 weeks of the Omer counting takes place in the month of Nisan during the astrological sign of Aries, the ram. But then we have 4 weeks of counting in the astrological sign of Taurus, which we're in currently, right? What's Taurus? The bull. Individual. The bull is about its independence. It's about fighting for itself. But we're going to conclude the Omer counting in another 2.5 weeks. We're then going to be in the month of Sivan. What is the astrological sign of that month? Gemini. I'm a Gemini. I don't know what that means. Practically speaking, I guess in my sense, I got my twin. I got a son born on my birthday. But let's try to understand, what has it got to do with the Omer counting that we're currently in? If Aries is the ram, it's about herd immunity. Now we understand why we don't just count the days, we also count the weeks. Remember, we're counting every day and making every day count. And we work on our personal self-refinement with a sphera, by each day refining a different aspect of our character. But how do we do so? There's two sides to it. On the one hand, we have the days. On the one hand, we count the weeks. On the other hand, we count the days, right? So if you counted last night, you said, Hayom, today is 32 days. Shnayim u'shloshim yom. 32 days, which is 4 weeks, and now 4 weeks and 4 days of the Omer counting, correct? That's why are we counting both the weeks and the days? If I say 32 days, don't you know, if you do a little bit of maths very quickly, you realize, 32 days is 4 weeks and 4 days. Or I could just count the weeks and say it's 4 weeks and 4 days. And I know the seventh, when it's 7 complete weeks, I reached Shavuos, received the Torah at Mount Sinai. Why am I counting both the days and the weeks? But this is perhaps a reminder to us of different, two ideas that come to mind. Number one is that the weeks, perhaps you could say, represents the community. That is Aries. In order for the Jews to leave Egypt, they had to be united together as a community. But at the same time, we count the days, which is Taurus, the individual. We work on our own self, but we realize that as indispensable as we are to the divine plan for this world, we're part of a greater community. What makes us unique and special is that we're part of this community. And only at the conclusion of these 7 weeks, when we reach Gemini, the twins, joining these two ideas, synthesizing them together, are we then ready to receive the Torah at Mount Sinai? Because the Torah is all about that unity in the community. And Lag BaOmer tonight is a festival where we celebrate that unity of bringing together the individual. We're working on ourselves, on our own self-refinement, but it's also about coming together. Perhaps you could say the same idea is about, we say a bracha when we count the Omer, we recognize God gave us the Torah. When God gave the Torah, God gave the first commandment, I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. On the one hand, Hashem is the God, the creator of heaven and earth, but at the same time, God has an individual relationship with each one of us, which is the same idea of counting the days and the weeks, that the day represents the individual. God has a relationship with you and with me and with every single one of us. God has a personal relationship. That's why we say, I'm the Lord God who took you out of the land of Egypt, out of your personal slavery, out of your own struggles and challenges. God's saying, I have a relationship with you. You're indispensable to my plan for this world. This world cannot exist without you. But at the same time, I realize I am part of a greater whole, and that's why I count the weeks as well. God says the whole world is created. I created the whole world, but I have a relationship with you. So there's the week, which is everyone else, and there's the day, which is the individual. Yes, Sheila, you have a question?
No.
No? Okay. So just try to mute it so it doesn't distract everyone else. Thank you. So with that in mind, let us continue. We're in the 33 days of the counting, and we discussed yesterday how during this time there's no music, and there's no weddings, and there's no festivities, and there's a lot of restrictions of sort of semi-mourning. It's not like the 9 days before Tisha B'Av, which is the saddest day on our calendar, but we certainly are less joyful. And the reason for that is, which we discussed previously, is the students of Rabbi Akiva, that they passed away during this time. And we're not going to go into all the details of it, which we discussed, but the lesson we could learn from them is that the reason they died, whenever a pandemic happens, it's good to know the pathophysiological cause for it. And if you could go back to Wuhan, and the World Health Organization is researching exactly how did this virus go out into the world, that's all important and that's good. But we as Jews also look for the spiritual cause. Now, I don't know who in our day and age could tell us exactly the spiritual cause. Perhaps each one of us could look into ourselves and tell ourselves what we think we could rectify within ourselves. I don't know if any of us has the authority to say this is the reason and to start telling everybody else why it happened. But to ourselves, I think it's a paramount. It's important that we look and reflect and think. In fact, the Talmud says, when a person isn't well, when a person's got a disease and illness, they should yifashvish b'masav. They should contemplate. They should consider their own actions, their own deeds. What might be the cause for their particular situation, condition? And likewise, in this sense, the students of Rabbi Akiva, the Talmud says, they did a little bit of a self-introspection, and they came to the realization that the reason for this plague that afflicted them was because of the lack of honor for one another. So just as they were able to realize then the reason for their disease and illness, I think it's important for us as well to think, what might it be in our own lives when something is going wrong? What can I do to rectify, to fix that particular problem in my own life? But something that I read last night, and that's why I'm sharing it with you today, which is less known, that happened during this period. Probably if you look throughout Jewish history, you'll always find times when we have experienced persecution and difficulties. In fact, every Shabbos Mevorchim, we skip a certain prayer of Arachamim, which is a prayer for the martyrs, those who were killed during tragic events in our history. And anti-Semitism is still as ripe as ever. We see that the Human Rights Watch this week determined how Israel's an apartheid state, and all the other allegations and accusations. There's no other country in the world that has as many condemnations from the United Nations against us. But thank God we survive, and thank God we have we're back in Israel today, where if God forbid anything happens, we know we could go home. But there's one Shabbos Mevarchim, which is Shabbos Mevarchim Sivan, in 2 weeks' time, when we actually do say this prayer, because there was a horrible event that occurred in our history, which was the story of it's called Tach V'Tat in 1648 and 1649. It was a horrible massacre. Hundreds of thousands of Jews were killed throughout Europe during that time by the horrible crusader named Khmelnytsky. But what's interesting, I read last night, is that besides for the story of the students of Rabbi Akiva dying in a pandemic during this period between Pesach and Shavuos, that there's a discussion of a massacre during the Crusades, That's right. During the Crusades, there were many Jews who died. And when was this, I guess, peak period of deaths during the Crusades? It was during this period between Pesach and Shavuos, and that's another reason for the semi-mourning that we experience, that we do during this time. So I thought I should include that in today's slides, that we understand that there's commemorations of what we are marking and why we are in this period of semi-mourning. So yes, it's the story of the students of Rabbi Akiva, but as you can see here, the Rhineland massacres that also occurred during this time, and that's another reason why we are mourning and no music is happening. However, Lag BaOmer, this day that we celebrate tonight, we commemorate, we realize that the deaths stopped, and that's why there's a reason to celebrate. So is the story of the students of Rabbi Akiva that stopped dying during this time, but it's also the massacre that occurred in the Rhineland during the Crusader period that also came to an end at this time, or at least came to a pause. There's different opinions. I was reading, I'm a little bit confused because sometimes I read our own texts, our own history, and it's sometimes a little bit unclear. Did the massacre happen between Pesach and Shavuos? Did it happen between Pesach and Lag BaOmer? I'm not exactly certain because I'm seeing conflicting reports, and perhaps there are different recorded historical facts at that time, and maybe that's why we observe both. But certainly Lag BaOmer was a day of celebration. But another reason for celebrating a Lag BaOmer was not only because of the cessation of this plague, the pandemic, as well as the massacre in the Crusader period, but also because this is the day that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who was one of the 5 surviving students of Rabbi Akiva, and he was the author of the Zohar, even though the Zohar was only discovered many years later, but he was the one who taught Jewish mysticism to the world. And because of the great light that he brought on the world, we commemorate this day of his passing, as per his request, with lighting bonfires. If you go anywhere in Israel, you'll see these bonfires all over the country. What's the purpose of them? To commemorate the day of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's passing. And the Zohar talks about this day in tremendous detail about his passing and what happened. And it was a day of tremendous blessing and miracles that occurred. And the Talmud talks a lot about this. I'm trying to give a little bit more of an overview, but if you want, I could go into the texts of the Talmud. I definitely printed some of them and have them with me here. So if you prefer that I actually read some of the Talmudic texts to you, I'm happy to do that. Or we could just go more of an overview, and I'll select certain passages or texts from the Talmud to quote. But the Arizal, who lived in Israel in the 1500s, right, some 5 centuries ago, discussed how in Israel there would be a major pilgrimage coming to the gravesite of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai on Lag BaOmer. And it's not only in Israel. Yes, in Israel there's a tremendous celebration, but all over the world, Lag BaOmer is marked with these festive outings. When we were kids, if Lag BaOmer was on a weekday, we would go on picnics, and children would play with toy bows and arrows, and there was always celebrations. But the highlight of my celebrations as a child was going to the parades that were at 770 in the presence of the Rebbe, and that itself was an outstanding, unbelievable experience. But one year, it was 2005, that I went to Israel for Lag BaOmer. It was an incredible experience. It was, in fact, the same sequence as this year. I arrived in Israel on Thursday evening. I took a shirut straight to my brother's house in Jerusalem, dropped my things at my brother's house, said hello and goodbye to my nephews, and got onto a bus. I think it's a 4 or 5 hour drive to Miron. I got there at 2 a.m. We arrived 8 p.m. I think 8 p.m. in Jerusalem. And it was very quick. I dropped my things at my brother's house, got onto a bus, got to Miron, spent all night in the dancing, the festivities. There were hundreds of thousands of people there. According to estimations, I believe there's usually 500,000 or more Jews who converge on Miron and Lag BaOmer. I was there till the morning, daven Shachar there at the resting place, and then eventually made my way back to Jerusalem for Shabbos. What an experience it was. And if you've never been there, whether it's Lag BaOmer or any other time of the year, it's always busy, and it's always special to be in the northern part of Israel. I think it's in the Upper Galilee, the village of Miron, to be at the resting place of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And of course, being at the resting place of a holy tzaddik as him brings tremendous blessing. And that's part of what I want to talk about today, is the idea of visiting the resting place of a tzaddik, especially on their yard site, is a time-honored tradition. It dates back to the times of the Amoraim, actually even further back. It's mentioned in the Torah that on the way to Israel, when the Meraglim, the spies, were scouting out the land, one of the places they stopped was in Hebron. At least that's where Joshua and Caleb stopped to pray at the resting place of the patriarchs and matriarchs. So ever since then, it's been a custom of Jews that we stop off at the resting places of the righteous on the anniversary of their passing. Just a second, ladies and gents, just an important call coming through. Yes, Philip?
Rabbi, you muted.
Thanks. No, I said I was just taking a quick call with something urgent. You know what? If somebody keeps calling, then I know sometimes it might be an urgent matter. And I apologize to all you on YouTube and Zoom. It's sometimes I got to just take that call that comes through. It's just the nature of the work I do. But thanks for hanging in there. So the point I'm making is that this is a time-honored tradition that's been going on forever throughout our history. Of course, you're praying to God, but in the merit of the great tzaddik whose resting places. And of course, many thousands of people every day come to the resting place of the Rebbe in New York. And around the world, there are many Jews who visit European gravestone cemeteries and make their way to many of the great rabbis who are buried in Europe. At the Rebbe's and Rebbitzins yard site and resting place in New York, yes, particularly on their yard site. But we see, if you look throughout Jewish literature, you'll see many great sages, from the Kabbalist Rabbi Marsha Kadavera, who writes about this, and Rabbi Yosef Karo is the author of the Shulchan Aruch, known as the Mechaber, that he spent the holiday of Sukkot in Iran with his family and his disciples. And he describes how there was a drought at the time. And Rabbi Yosef Karo says he prayed intensely for rain at the resting place, at the grave of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And he describes how his prayers were answered. And in fact, it rained. Israel needs rain. Unlike Egypt, where the Jews were slaves, where they rely on the Nile to irrigate their fields, in Israel, you don't have an irrigation system such as there. And if you recall, when there was a little bit of a drought here a couple of years ago, how they limited our shower times and things like that. In fact, I drove out to the game reserve. This must be 2015 or 16 when we were experiencing a really bad drought here. I remember seeing animals that were looking emaciated. So you could tell when it affects even the animals. And in Israel, at a time when there was a drought, and they depend on the rain. In fact, God intentionally made it that way. God says to the Jewish people, this land is not like the land where you come from. Here, you have to pray. You have to actually ask God. You could plow, you could plant, you could do everything you want for your crops to grow. But if you don't make that effort, if you don't reach out if you don't get the rain, it's not going to help. Nothing's going to blossom, nothing's going to grow. So in the land of Israel, we have to pray to God. And that year there was a drought. And Rabbi Yosef Karo describes how he prayed at the resting place of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And praying in the resting place of tzaddikim, we're saying to God, even if we in this generation aren't privy, don't deserve these blessings in our life, but at least in the merit of this great, holy, righteous person who lived long ago and was buried in this place, in their merit, we should have the blessings in our life. And there are many others who describe their experiences of Lag BaOmer at the grave of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. They describe that many barren couples who struggled with conceiving, with bearing children, were cured of their infertility, and describe how many sick people were healed, and many other blessings and miracles that happened by visiting the gravesite of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai on Lag BaOmer. And one of the ways this was described by the Arizal talks about the significance of this day. I just want to read a few quotes to you that I printed. So one of them is here. He says that, there used to be a custom that people would mourn. Some people still do. If you go to Jerusalem, you go to the Kotel, And if you go there at midnight, you will see that there's many people who come at midnight and they say the prayer of Tikkun Chatzot. Tikkun Chatzot is the midnight prayer morning, lamenting the destruction of the temple. And the Arizal says it's not appropriate to say those prayers on Lag BaOmer because we don't say those prayers on days of joy and days of celebration. So just another aspect of it. Now, another tradition on Lag BaOmer, there's lots of traditions because Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai declared this a day of celebration, which again is a reminder to us, as much as we mourn the passing of our loved ones, there's also what to celebrate the life that they lived, the purpose of why they came into this world. And I think it's important to realize that yes, when a person passes on, we miss them, we mourn for them, but it's also worthwhile to celebrate the life that they lived. Here you can see a picture of the resting place of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. You could go, if you've been to Israel, you might recognize it. Let me just put up a few pictures here that will describe some of the customs that are performed that are done on this day. So here are just 4 of them. Let's start with hair cutting. There's a well-known custom that we let our children's hair grow, right, until the 3rd birthday. And then we cut the hair, but we're very careful to leave the sideburns here, the payas, right? Why? And there's obviously the different customs of that. Some people let it go much longer and put it behind their ears. Some people have long payas to emphasize this mitzvah. But when you get your haircuts, we don't cut these corners at the minimum. Okay, in Hasidic custom, we don't cut our beards either. So if I let my beard grow out, you could see, uncut beards. They go all the way out. Ironically, they say those who cut their beards, it tends to grow longer and bigger. So sometimes, but I don't know if that's the case because you can find people who never cut their beards and it's certainly long, and some people who cut or didn't cut and it's short. I guess it all depends on your DNA. But whatever difference, there's a custom on the 3rd birthday, and this is another discussion about children being compared to the tree in the field. And just as a tree in the field, we have the mitzvah of Orla, not to touch its fruit for the first 3 years. We also have a custom not to cut a child's hair. And there's a lot of similarities between the humans and the children. In fact, and trees. The Torah says, Ki ha'adam eitz hasadeh, man is like a tree of the field. So there's many lessons we could learn from trees. On the one hand, the tree has its roots deep down in the ground. And likewise, we have our roots deep in history. Although my wife made a very interesting observation on Friday night. She said, if she were to hold the hand of her mother and my daughter and her mother's mother, and by the way, thank God, my wife's grandmother, who's in her late 90s, Bli Ayin Hara, and she's got 5 generations of grandchildren, right? So my mother-in-law, who's her daughter, and my wife, who's her granddaughter, and my nieces also have children, 5 generations, Bli Ayin Hara, that all can hold hands together. But the observation my wife made, if you hold hands with your mother and your mother's mother and your mother's mother's mother, you can probably count 100 to 200 women, and you'll be up holding the hand of Sarah Imenu, of our matriarch Sarah. Just think about that. Sometimes we think of 3,000 years ago, so long ago. But if you do the calculation, it's maybe only 200 people, maximum. I think it's between 100 and 200 people if you count back the generations. And you'll be holding the hands of your matriarch. So it's just an interesting observation. But the point we're making is we could go, we have the roots connecting us to our past. And at the same time, we have our fruit that are the perpetuation of ourselves, the continuity, the next generation. And there's many other ideas. Of course, in order for trees to grow and to grow nicely and properly, they need TLC, they need that tender loving care, they need to be looked after, they need sunshine, they need watering, and the same thing as ourselves as well. If you want our fruit, our children, we want the next generation to continue, we need to have both. We need to care for the tree, we need to look after its roots, the past generation, and we need to look after the fruit of the next generation. So those are all important aspects, but not to digress about our relationship with trees. I was just mentioning that as a point, as a parenthetical note, relating to the idea of the upsharn, or as it's called in Hebrew, chalaka, which is the first time we cut the child's hair, which is on their 3rd birthday. Now, of course, we know that you can't cut hair between Pesach and Lag BaOmer. Lag BaOmer is the first opportunity. If you need a haircut, you can get a haircut tonight or tomorrow. But until Lag BaOmer, we don't cut hair. So when's the first opportunity to cut one's hair after Pesach? Lag BaOmer. So you'll find not only in Iran, but here in Joburg and anywhere else in the world, any children who haven't had their first haircut, there's going to be a festivity, celebration, and usually it's accompanied by a special, a nice meal. And in today's day and age, people throw big parties. So that's the custom of first haircuts on Lag BaOmer. Another thing to look at, and did I put it in the pictures? Yes, right there, lighting the bonfires. Because, as I mentioned before, that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai he was such a great luminary. Think about the book he brought into the world. What is the book called? The Zohar. What does Zohar mean? Zohar means radiance. So to symbolize that radiance, there is the lights. Now, it also reminds you why we also kindle a light, a candle on a yard site, or when a person passes away, because the candle symbolizes the neshama, the soul. What is it that keeps the soul here tethered in the body? It's the body, right? But when the body is no longer alive, when the heart stops to circulate blood around, then there's no longer a body. And that's when the candle returns to its heavenly source. So the idea that the Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, it's his yard site, so we light a fire, not just an ordinary candle, but a tremendous candle, a bonfire, to symbolize the great light that he introduced in the world with the mystical teachings of the Zohar that he introduced, that he brought in. Also, the Zohar, the Talmud tells us that when he passed away, firstly, the sun set later that day, and there are a lot of other interesting ideas. Talks about a great light that hovered around his deathbed the entire day. So there's a lot of symbolism, which, without quoting all of the texts that discuss it, the idea is that we light fires on Lag BaOmer tonight to commemorate the spiritual revelation, the great light that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai brought into the world. Another interesting thing is the bows and arrows. I know a lot of people aren't familiar with that, but when I was a kid, and I'm assuming my kids will have this in school tomorrow as well, they usually gave us these toy bow and arrow sets to play with when we go on picnics. When we were kids, we had to go to the park, but here in Joburg, at least at my kids' school in Torah Academy, they have wonderful lawns, and it's beautiful, great place for them to go out and play. And I'm sure they'll be doing similar. And one of the explanations or reasons for this is because what's the purpose? Well, first of all, how do you say a bow? And even there's a few aspects here, because even in English you say rainbow, right? Bow and arrow, rainbow. But in Hebrew, the Hebrew word is keshet. So a keshet is a bow and arrow, and it's also a rainbow. Now the idea is that in the time of when did the first rainbow come into this world? It was the conclusion of the great deluge, the Mabul, in the times of Noach. God put a rainbow to say, I will never destroy the world again. So a rainbow, as beautiful as it is, it's also a symbol that God perhaps is not so happy with our behavior in this world. And so the rainbow is to tell us that instead of destroying the world, God puts the rainbow as a reminder not to destroy the world. But the Talmud says that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was such a great person that it was in his merit, in his lifetime, there was no necessity, there was no need for a rainbow, because it was his merit of the way he lived his life in such a spiritually attuned way that God did not destroy the world in his lifetime. So we play with bows to commemorate that miracle. There's another reason that's based on a teaching in the Zohar, that there will be an extremely bright, vivid rainbow before Mashiach comes. And this is connected to Lag BaOmer because the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, taught that learning the mystical dimension of Torah, the teachings of Hasidus, is important in today's day and age because that's a taste of the Zohar. The Zohar, firstly, is not meant to be studied before one reaches age 40. Why not? I got a long time, 22 years till I reach 40. So it's going to be a long while away till I could start studying any Zohar. But the idea is that 40 is a time when you've really attained knowledge and wisdom. And once you've really learned enough Torah, you have a good basis. Now you could begin to study the deeper mystical elements and aspects of Torah. But Hasidus gives us the depths of Torah without the necessity of actually studying the deep Zohar that is difficult to comprehend and understand. And the reason the Baal Shem Tov revealed the teachings of Chassidus, which is very deep and mystical, is because we're coming close to the era of Mashiach, when the time of the teachings of mysticism will be more revealed in the world. Another custom, did I put it on here? No, it's not here. I'm sorry. I apologize. Let's just see. Oh, here we go. Caribs. Okay. So caribs, there is a custom to eat caribs on Lag BaOmer. Why do we eat caribs? Well, the Gemara relates a story. The Rabbi Shimon was once overheard criticizing the Roman government in Israel, and he had to flee for his life together with his son, Rabbi Elazar. And they took refuge first in a shul, and his wife would bring him food, and then they moved over to a cave where they remained first for 12 years and then for an additional year because they had to acclimatize, they had to acclimate to coming back into this world. And the Talmud says that God made a miracle. How did they sustain themselves for 12 years in a cave? Well, there was a fresh spring of water, and miraculously, there was a carob tree that grew. Ordinarily, it takes time for carob trees to grow. Yet, it grew and blossomed so spontaneously, quick. So, to commemorate that, many people eat carobs on Lag BaOmer. So, if you're looking for nice food to eat, well, carob would be the food to eat on Lag BaOmer. Some people eat figs as well because they say that the carob tree also grew figs. So, during the week, Rabbi Shimon and his son sustained themselves by eating carobs, and on Shabbos they had a treat, figs. So there were many blessings that many miracles that occur at the resting place of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai on his yard site, and the significance. I was going to tell you stories, but you know what? I think if you want to hear stories, come join us at our bride tonight. And I'll tell you more stories this evening because I think there's a lot more I want to cover about the customs and the traditions and the idea about this day. So I'll skip the stories if you don't mind. But if you want some stories, please do join me tonight. Join our community at the shul from 5:30 to 7:30 or even later. We'll have some delicious food that's being marinated since yesterday, prepared on our bonfire and braai at the shul. You're all welcome to come for the Lag BaOmer celebrations at Santon Central Shul. Another great, and of course it's a wonderful memory, was the Lag BaOmer parade that I mentioned earlier. And just as we have it right here, in Hayom Yom, if you read the daily teaching, the little nuggets, gems taught by the Rebbe each day, he would describe the great miracles that would occur on Lag BaOmer, and describes how the Mittler Rebbe, Rabbi Dov Ber, who was the second Rebbe in the Chabad dynasty, he would really cherish Lag BaOmer, and he would go out into the fields with his Hasidim, and he would personally participate in the celebrations in every way possible. It says that he didn't actually eat from the meal, but everyone else did, and they would have a barbecue. And I remember Lag BaOmer at least twice. I think one was 1991. I don't remember what other year. We were in the park, and the Rebbe came in his car, and it was a big deal. Wow, the Rebbe came to the park. The Rebbe had a very busy schedule. And yet, in Lag BaOmer, he made time for the children and came and drove around the park, and we all got to see him participate in the Lag BaOmer celebrations. And he describes how his predecessors always participated in Lag BaOmer, were always part of the community celebrations, of the parades, and it was always a day of tremendous unity, and the kids would have their drumming bands and floats, and I can't describe it to you. You have to watch a video, which could, you could go onto Google and type in Lag BaOmer Chabad, and I'm sure you'll find lots of videos of what was so special about those days. Each of those floats displayed various Jewish themes, and the parades would be with kids walking and holding banners about all types of themes in Judaism and Jewish pride. And there were always rides and activities and fun things and what do we call it? Where the kids have fun in the various competitions. Come on, this is a sign of my old age. I thought I'm only 18. No, we have carnivals. It was always fun. And in fact, one year, this is before my days, but in 1967, you could watch videos. It's a well-known Lag BaOmer, where the Rebbe spoke at the parade about the crisis that was then happening in the Middle East. And he issued a call to increase in the fulfillment of the Torah, of putting on tefillin and Jewish unity. And he spoke about how although there are enemies who are trying to attack the Jewish people, but Israel will be victorious. And indeed, a few days later was the 6-Day War. And in 1980, the Rebbe gave instructions that Lag BaOmer, that the children around the world should be part of the celebrations, and thousands of children participated in so many rallies and events. Here in Johannesburg, in ordinary years, there's always big events, whether it's at the Great Park Shul, we have the Shmuza, I'm sure they're going to have it virtually tonight. And there's always, if it's on a Sunday, we have Lag BaOmer parades. The Chabad House organizes. There's always great events to celebrate Lag BaOmer, and make sure that you celebrate Lag BaOmer as well. But while we're talking about this, we discussed last week Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his son, Rabbi Elazar, who was also a great, great personality. So I just want to conclude today by talking a little bit about them and some ideas. You know, the Zohar tells us the story of the great sages, Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Yossi were talking, and they were discussing words of Torah. Just a second, ladies and gents. Johnny, can I call you right back?
No problem.
In about 20 minutes. Okay, thanks. Yeah. So, now I'm trying to remember what was the story that I wanted to mention to you. Okay, I have the image here on the screen, but I have to remember what the story was. There was something here specific that I wanted to mention. Okay, let me try to remember. The point that I wanted to make was that within the Zohar, there's a lot of great, deep mystical teachings. And here is a teaching from the Zohar that I want to share with you. That's an interesting insight that's worthwhile. Okay, so I'm going to just pick it up on my phone, read it to you, and let's learn from this teaching. You know, after all, we talk about this great sage. Why don't we get a taste of what he taught? So here is something. This is from the Gemara, and it mentions a teaching of Rabbi Shimon that I think is worthwhile, an insight of his. And it goes as follows. Rabbi Chia said, I heard a Torah thought from Rabbi Elazar. The verse states, I will not despise them, nor will I reject them to annihilate them. Why? Because my beloved one is among them, for whom they are all my beloved. It writes, lechalosam, without a vav, which instead of being interpreted as to annihilate them, lechalosam is interpreted as, what else could he say? Lechalosam means to annihilate. But if it, remember in the Torah, and in many written, if you read a newspaper in Israel, you're going to see that it doesn't have vowels, right? No nekudot. So the same word could be spelled as lekalosam. What is lekalosam? To their bride. Meaning it's for the bride that I don't reject them. God's saying. So here is a great teaching from Rabbi Shimon. He says, like a person who loves a woman who lives in a tanner's market whose odor is foul. Now just think about that for a moment. You fall in love with a person, whether it's a man or a woman. In this case, he's talking about lekalos, and he's using the woman as the example. Good question that just was posted by Mickey. Why is it? Now, some people give him the second day of Pesach and some from Rosh Chodesh. Usually, you're right, halacha is clear cut. I think the reason, as I mentioned earlier, is because there's a debate about what the actual period of the pandemic that took place happened. Like I said earlier, I'm not sure which date it is, and those who are pious try to just follow the strictest rule. The strictest rule is to observe from the day after Pesach all the way through to 3 days before Shavuos. So that's the reason why, but some people follow the most lenient. Don't forget, with many aspects of Judaism, right? Some people only wait 1 hour from meat to milk. Some people wait 3 hours, and the strictest is wait 6 hours. So there are different opinions in certain aspects of Judaism. Let's just go back to this Talmudic statement, because I just found it to be something very interesting that I wanted to share with you with a quote from the Zohar. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai here talks about this verse where God says, I will not destroy my people. And the word lechalosam, to destroy them, can be read in two ways. Either lechalosam, which means I will not to destroy them, or lechalosam because of my bride. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, one of his teachings says that imagine a man falls in love with a woman who works in a tannery. Tannery is a place that has a terrible odor. Another aspect that he says about the tannery is that it's the quintessential example of, throughout halacha, of a putrid place. Right? The halacha mandates that a tannery is not allowed to be built inside the city, because it has such a horrible smell that comes from it, and it wouldn't be right to the residents, to the inhabitants of the town. And not only that, it could only be situated outside at least 50 amas, which is 50 amas. An amma is about 18 inches, about half a meter. Okay, so it's not that far, I believe at least 25 meters outside of the city, but only on the eastern side of the city, because the winds are calmer on that side and won't bring the bad smell back into the city. So the point that's being made is that a tannery has a really bad smell. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was saying here, imagine a person falls in love with someone who works in a tannery, right? And do you still love them even though they work in a place with a foul smell, right? If she did not work in the tannery, he would never set foot into the tannery, is what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says. But because she's there, the tanner's market seems like a perfume market to him because he's in love with her. So it's like the finest fragrance around. That's the way he sees it. And similarly, says Rabbi Shimon, even when the Jews are not behaving properly, God says, I will not despise them and I will not reject them. Literally, I won't lechalos them. I won't destroy them because they are my beloved people. When your child misbehaves, you still love your child, right? But Rabbi Shimon made it a little bit different. Lekalosam. He's illustrating with this example that when you're in love with somebody, even when they disappoint you, even when they have a foul smell, you still love them. And to you, it's still the greatest and finest smell. And perhaps you could also say that if it's your kala, when the wedding day comes, you're going to do what you can to eliminate the foul smell of that tannery, and you're going to come in your finest to the wedding to celebrate the marriage. And don't forget, Rabbi Shimon referred to this day as his wedding day. So there's a lot more examples of many other teachings of Rabbi Shimon in the Zohar. I don't know if we have enough time to go into all the deep teachings of the Zohar today, but the point is, if you study the Zohar, you'll see many, many examples of the depth. But I just want to continue just on this theme that, there's a very beautiful message here from Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, especially since we refer to this day of his passing as like a wedding day. That it should not be a sad day, but it should be a day of celebration. And he's saying, even if we disappoint, even if we sometimes don't follow the ways of the Torah, God betrothed us when God gave us the Torah at Mount Sinai. And so still, we are celebrating that relationship despite the foul odor that might exist. The magic is in the ear. There's a celebration. And the intensity of the day, of the wedding day, will obscure all the faults when you're in love with somebody. And so that's perhaps one of the examples from the Zohar of the way Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai described that deep relationship of our relationship with God. Any questions? Because the truth is, there's a lot more to talk about. Our relationship with God is one that is exactly that regardless of what happens, God's still here for us and with us. And as it says, God's with us in our struggles and our difficulties. God's love for us is so great that that despite our foul-smelling odor, God still sees it as a perfume shop. But of course, we got to go to the wedding. We got to prepare for our relationship with God, not smelling foul, but rather working in that relationship with Hashem. Any questions that anyone has on today's discussion? Okay, so we'll leave it here. It's 11 o'clock. There's a lot more to discuss. As you can see, prepared a lot more notes, but I'll leave it for another time. And please God, we'll continue and discuss more in our next shiur. I look forward to learn with you. Actually, as we're getting closer to Shavuos, I promised we'll talk about Ruth. So please God, next week we'll do a little bit of a series about Ruth, because after all, we need more Ruths in the world and less ruthlessness. So I heard that from Rabbi Barry. What was his name? Rabbi Barry Marcus at the Bevis Mark Synagogue in the UK. In fact, some of you might remember Rabbi Barry Marcus from Waverly Shul, right? That's where he was a rabbi. I did not know him at Waverly Shul, but I did meet him at Bevis Mark Synagogue. I was once there for Shavuos in 1999. So that's when I met him, long time ago. But I remember that statement that he said. I really liked it. So we'll talk about Ruth next week, and we'll learn about Shavuos. We'll get ready and prepared to receive the Torah in our own way right here. We'll make Mount Sinai in Joburg. So please be here, be part of the shiurim, participate. You're all welcome to join us this evening at our shul for a braai and a bonfire, and be part of the celebrations. I look forward to celebrating with you, and look forward to see you all in person soon. All the best. Happy Lag BaOmer, Sei gesund.
Thank you, Rabbi. So well.
It's a pleasure. Thank you all. Great seeing you, and stay healthy and well.